Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you are having a fantastic day. Let me introduce this video by first showing you this pic behind me that was shared by a fellow Canadian who took the time to enjoy some of our magnificent provincial and federal parks. Scott shared this pic in our I Choose Canada group that has 8,000 members now. A beautiful pic that he took, can you guess? Algonquin Park in Ontario, and he calls this his room with a view. And what a beautiful view it is. And any room that has a view of any national or provincial park in our country has a fantastic view. Okay, so here's the topic for today's video. The United States has threatened us with consequences should we back out of the F35 Fighter Jet contract. And in this video, I'm going to ask you to leave your comments in the comment section of whether you think we should or we shouldn't. But before you do that, let me give you the background information, because a lot of these decisions are a lot more complicated than you think. Let's get into it. Reported in the Ottawa Citizen on September 15th, just a few days ago, the US warns Canada of potential negative consequences if it dumps F-35 fighter jet. The review of Canada's proposed purchase of 88 US-built F-35s is set to be finalized on September 22nd. Now, US officials don't elaborate on what negative consequences are. It seems that they just wanted to float that out there as a warning to us. Now, what is this review that's supposed to end on September 22nd? That's just a few days from now. Well, that's something that started immediately after Mark Carney was elected. One of the first things he did was order his defense minister to do a review on this purchase of F-35 fighter jets from the United States. And as was reported here on an article on CBC on March 15th, Canada had awarded a contract for 88 F-35 fighters, and payment for the first 16 have already been made. And this contract is worth about $100 billion just on the purchase of the planes, plus maintenance in the future, upgrades in the future, and plus. Now, all of that money represents a payment from the government of Canada to a US firm that would build these. All the building and all future maintenance would be done in the United States. But pretty much immediately after Mark Carney was elected, he signaled a reevaluation of how Canada procures military hardware. And this article here from Defense News on June 24th, Canada and the EU signed Defense Pact that could enable joint weapons work. This is when Canada for the first time was invited to the EU summit. They renamed it the EU-Canada Summit in Brussels. And in that summit, Canada joined as a partner with the European Union in a $1.3 trillion defense spending initiative. And one of the major European countries that builds military equipment is Saab. Now, one of the key factors that could influence this decision is that Saab has now indicated that they would build those fighter jets in Canada. In fact, if you go to Saab's website here and you navigate to the Canada section, you can see it on their own website here. Made in Canada Fighter. The Gripen program will create 6,000 new high-paying jobs across Canada per year over the course of a 40-year period. These are direct jobs relevant to the program and related investments. They also come with the added benefit of intellectual property transfer from Saab, helping to build additional capabilities in Canada's aerospace industry. They go on to say Gripen will be built, maintained, and upgraded in Canada, together with our Canadian partners, following a contract award. Saab will also establish a Gripen Center in Montreal that will employ Canadians to manage and maintain the country's Gripen fleet. We have also announced that Saab will invest in a cyber resilience center in Toronto, a sensor center in Vancouver, and an aerospace R&D center in Montreal. Now that sounds like a pretty sweet offer. Saab doing everything in their power to try and get Canada to switch, dump the F-35, and commit to building their jets in Canada. It doesn't sound so bad. And this has been a common theme with Mark Carney now. Just recently, on September 16th, the headline is German or South Korean subs. We're also trying to decide who should we buy submarines from. And I believe the Canadian government's looking at buying 8 to 12 new submarines. Ottawa's pick will hinge on economic windfall. Spending on major military projects must boost economy, says Carney Defense Procurement Secretary of State. And I would point out that both these submarine contracts stipulate that the manufacture and the maintenance will be done in Canada. Made in Canada with Canadian materials, building maintenance facilities and ongoing maintenance for decades to come in Canada. And this goes hand in hand with another announcement Mark Carney made, that Canada promises to spend 5%, not 2%, of GDP on defense by 2035. And at the same time, make sure that that spending has the biggest impact on the Canadian economy. Now, let me just talk about military spending in general here with a picture of the Gripen in the background. For the longest time over the past decades, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the United States has always wanted Canada to spend more on its military. And Canada has always been reluctant to spend more on our military because there's a marked difference between military spending in the United States and military spending in Canada. I'm going to explain it to you. The US economy almost relies on military spending. They're the country that spends by far the most on military of any country on earth. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm just going to explain how the economics works. The way it works is the US government, which spends far more than it raises in taxes, borrows money from abroad. The US government then injects that money into its own economy by building its own military. All the military procurement within the United States, those contracts go directly from US federal government to US-based military companies that make everything that they use, their whole military complex. When the United States increases military spending, they're basically injecting money into their own economy. The government is directly funding growth and jobs in their own economy. On the other hand, for Canada, it goes something like this. The United States demands that we spend more on our military, but they insist that we buy from them. They want us to buy their equipment that's built in their country, citing national security concerns. The United States has never wanted or encouraged, you could almost say never allowed, Canada to have its own military complex. They're interested in us buying military equipment from them. Up till now, Canada increasing its military spending basically meant that the federal government of Canada would inject cash into the US economy. And that dynamic has always resulted in Canada being reluctant to increase spending and the United States always demanding us to spend more. But now Canada is taking more and more liberty to do military spending deals with other countries other than the United States. For example, while Donald Trump was saying something like, if Canada wants to be safe, well, they'll have to pay $50 billion for the Golden Dome. That's what we call it. We like gold, so we call it the Golden Dome. And then they'll be safe from all the threats. It's a nasty world out there. There's lots of threats, lots of nasty things. Some people say the most nasty of them could be for Canada. Canada's got a lot of nasty things happening up there under the ice, and they got a lot of ice. So for $80 billion, they could choose. They could get it for free if they become a 51st state. Or they'll have to pay $200 billion so that we'll make them safe. But either way, it's up to them. They could, for free or $300 billion, they can choose. I think I kind of mixed up my Donald Trump impersonation with my Marlon Brando impersonation. While he said something like that, Canada was quietly ignoring him and announced a $6 billion deal with Australia to develop Arctic radar missile detection system, a deal where companies from Canada and Australia will work together to build this system, manufacturing and jobs in both countries. But now as Canada is pivoting from this situation and turning more to integrating with the EU and possibly canceling this F-35 contract, US diplomats strategically leaked this. US warns Canada of potential negative consequences if it dumps the F-35 jet. Now, what are these negative consequences? The article doesn't explain that, but it's all very vague. But let me paint a picture for you now. One thing that's happening behind closed doors that we all know is Canada and the United States negotiating trade. And we all know that CUSMA, USMCA, is scheduled for review next year. And one of the cards that Canada is holding now is this F35 Fighter Jet contract. And just to give you an idea of how big this contract is, the 88 planes, the initial price for those 88 planes I mentioned was about $100 billion. Well, $100 billion is about how much oil we export to the United States in one given year. More than the value of all the autos that Ontario exports to the United States in one given year. A $100 billion contract is huge, and it's the type of contract that's not decided by private industry. The federal government in Canada has total control of how much it spends and who it gives the contract to. And from the day Mark Carney took office, he realized how important a negotiating card this contract would be. And that's why it's been reviewed. And it's kind of held up there now like I think, a negotiating tool. So what's the end game here? Let's go back to the question I asked you at the beginning of the video. Should we dump the F-35 contract in favor of the Gripen contract? Now, before you answer, again, let me give you one more thing to think about. We should take possession of the 16 F-35s that we've already paid for, and then we should end that contract, and we should do a deal with Saab and get the Gripen built here in Canada. That's my opinion. That's what I would kind of like to happen as a proud, patriotic Canadian, as I'm sure a lot of you would share this opinion. But what might be a smarter thing to do, and what I think will probably happen, is that the government will do this. They'll just delay. They won't do anything. They'll continue to study this. They'll say things like, we finalized our assessment of this matter on September 22nd, and now we're considering our options. And this will be used as Canada's trump card, excuse the pun, as we negotiate our trade relationship with the United States. And those negotiations are going to heat up and become more and more intense next year, when the USMCA and CUSMA has to be reevaluated. This is the biggest card we hold. And I would be surprised if our government commits either way, unless the positives of having the Gripen manufactured in Canada are overwhelmingly positive, or if there's some concession that the US would make regarding the renegotiating of USMCA if we honor this contract. All of those things are getting discussed behind the scene, and it may be that we don't make what many of you would consider the right decision if you only look at this issue alone. If you're only looking at, should we buy the Gripen or the F-35? I think it's a very simple decision. But once you include the renegotiation of our entire trade agreement with the US, then maybe a different decision will be made. So now that I've completed the whole discussion and given you the whole flavor of this issue, now let me know in the comment section, what do you think we should do? It has been studied and it's proven that the average human, it's just human nature, we like to make decisions in approximately 4 to 8 seconds. That's how long it usually takes us to make complicated decisions. The average person is exposed to a few conversations at Starbucks. He's read a couple of tweets. He's watched a couple of Hollywood movies, maybe heard about an issue on a 10-second clip that he saw on his Facebook feed. And if asked, where do you stand on this issue? Should we buy the Gripen or should we buy the F-35? On average, it takes about 4 to 8 seconds for someone to make up their mind. And once they've made up their mind, they will think that they've analyzed all the data and they have the best decision possible for our country. And I hope I've pointed out in this video that these decisions are a lot more complicated than they seem. And there's a lot of negotiation going on behind the scenes, and we really don't know what's going to happen. I'm interested in reading your comments. I'm sure that you guys have some insightful things to say. Let's see what kind of a conversation we have today. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying my content. If you'd like to support my work in the future, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button. Have a fantastic rest of your day, everyone, and I'll catch you all on the next one.